to do that. Okay. So the settlement at the end of the Latin War in 340 BCE is our starting point. Over the previous 50 years, Rome had gradually expanded its sphere of influence to the southern edge of Latium, represented by the thin dotted red line on the map. Then, in only 5 years, Rome fought an indecisive war with the Samnites while taking a giant swath of territory to the south. The Romans swept through the area occupied by the Arunci tribe, and then, the greatest prize, took control of the rich Campania, which is the area up to the thick dotted red line on the map. Rome accompanied these territorial acquisitions with far-reaching constitutional changes to incorporate the inhabitants. The state that emerges from these changes can be called the Roman Commonwealth. The Romans had solved the problem that the Greeks were never able to solve, namely, how to overcome the limitations of the city-state in respect to the growth of territory and population. The Republic did this without losing its essential character. Going forward, the Romans could incorporate non-Roman people into the Commonwealth and project power over great distances. We take this concept for granted today, but this was a revolutionary innovation. The Samnites were Rome's most formidable enemy. They had seen their own efforts to expand into the Campania stymied by the Romans, but they had not suffered serious losses, and their military capability was intact. And for a people on the strategic defensive, the terrain of Samnia was an advantage to the Samnites. The Apennine mountain chain ran down the center of their territory, and there were Samnite towns in the valleys and in the foothills on both sides of the mountains. There were 4 tribes in the Samnite Confederation, and they were more cohesive than Rome's previous adversaries. They went to war as a united army under a single leader. The Samnites lived in the saddle of land in the between the Campanian plain to the west. Let me get my pointer going here. So the Campanian plain is this area here. So they were on like a saddle of land in between the Campanian plain on the left and the Apulian plain on the east. From this position, the Samnites had the potential to dominate central and southern Italy. These things made them the most formidable enemy that Rome had encountered up until this point. The First Samnite War had ended with a treaty which divided the Roman and Samnite spheres of influence along the line of the river Liris, which is the thick blue line here. It doesn't mean that it's a bigger river than the others, but I wanted to emphasize this boundary between their respective spheres of influence. Also point out that that doesn't mean that in particular for the Samnites, that Samnites controlled everything up to the line. In fact, at the time that the treaty came into place, the Samnites were looking to expand into this area here, which was occupied by the Volsci tribe and the Sidicini tribe. And this was allowed under their treaty with Rome. So here I've highlighted some of the important places on the map. I've got a nice high definition map today, so I'm going to do some zooming. Does that zoom work?
Yes.
Am I zoomed
Yes.
in? Okay, great.
Yes.
So I've highlighted some of the important places on the map. Here is, oops, it looks like I can't zoom and point at the same time. Do you see any pointer or cursor or anything?
No.
No.
I don't see
Okay.
anything.
So you'll just have to take it from my voice description. So we see Neapolis in the center of the screen. That's modern day Naples. And it was the last independent Greek city in the Campania, or in the whole area of Italy, north of the boot of Italy. Like many Greek cities, Neapolis was afflicted with political conflict between the propertied class and the common people. The common people tended to be sympathetic to the Samnites, while the rich saw Rome as their natural ally. To the north of Neapolis is Capua. Capua was the main city of the Campania and the main city of the Campani people. In 343, it had antagonized the Samnites by voluntarily submitting to Rome, and this set off the First Samnite War. Campania is encircled by a ring of hills and mountains that mark the beginning of Samnite territory. The city of Caudium, which you can see on the map, controlled the western approach to Samnite territory and was the capital of the Caudine tribe, one of the 4 Samnite tribes. Caudium also gave its name to a terrain feature called the Caudine Forks, and this will play a major role in our discussion. Towards the top of the screen, let me get that in the center, we see the town of Caulis. Caulis was a Roman colony established in 334. It was the first Roman colony established after the Latin War, and it was the prototype for the colonies that Rome would establish to project military power and guard the strategic perimeter of Roman territory. Caulis, like all these Roman colonies, was located in a strategically important location. And here's why Caulis was important. The red line marks the Via Latina, which was the only road connecting Rome and Capua. It was an old road built long before the Romans started building its famous network of superbly engineered Roman roads. The Via Latina followed the terrain and became impassable under bad weather conditions. Another major problem was that it ran dangerously close to the Samnite frontier. There was a route closer to the sea, which ran through the Pontine Plain. But the Pontine Plain really would be better called the Pontine Marsh. It was a marshland, it was difficult to traverse, and it was rife with malaria. So Caulis was critical for maintaining communication between Rome and the Campania. Then in 328, the Romans did something unprecedented. And I'm focusing in now on the city of Fregellae. In 328, Rome deliberately provoked an enemy by breaking a treaty. This is emphasized by Professor Marco Maioro at Columbia, that this was the first time in Roman history, at least recorded Roman history, that we know that the Romans deliberately broke a treaty to provoke an enemy. And the Romans did this by founding a colony at Fregellae. Fregellae was actually a Volscian city in Volscian territory. But Fregellae was on the east bank of the river Liris, and that was within the Samnite sphere of influence based on the Treaty of 342. In the years immediately preceding the founding of the Roman colony, the Samnites had made war on the Volsci and had destroyed the city of Fregellae. Now the Romans supplied insult and injury both by placing a Roman colony there. At this point, a new war between the Romans and Samnites was just waiting for a spark. That spark occurred at Naples. The Roman sources claim that the Samnites incited the Neapolitans to attack Rome's possessions in Campania and to encourage other cities to revolt. When the Romans declared war on Naples, the democratic faction asked the Samnites for assistance. The Samnites sent a garrison to defend the city, and the Roman Senate sent their leading general, the plebeian consul Publius Philo, to conduct the siege. The siege dragged on, and there had been little progress as the end of Publius' year as consul approached. The Senate responded with another innovation. They designated Publius as a proconsul so he could continue the war. This step, to enable a consul to maintain imperium, which is to say the power of command, after the expiration of his term, had never been taken before by the Romans. By the end of the Samnite Wars, it had become commonplace. In 326, the pro-Roman faction was able to expel the Samnite garrison and hand the city over to Publius. This marked the end of the so-called Neapolitan War and beginning of the Second Samnite War. I want to pause for a moment to tell you about an excellent resource. Gordon Davis is the author of an impressive series of articles on this period in military history online. And I have posted links to these 3 articles in the chat. Davis, who modestly describes himself as an amateur military historian, constructs an extremely coherent narrative of these events on a year-by-year level, making extensive use of the ancient sources and contemporary commentary by modern historians. So these links are in the chat window, and I strongly recommend them to everybody here. And I'm using them extensively in this presentation. So when we look at Rome's strategic options, we can see that the city was at a disadvantage. Rome's traditional mode of warfare was to attack the enemy as directly as possible and as quickly as possible. One incentive for this was that the leaders of the armies, either consuls or dictators, had only a limited time to earn the honor that they all sought, which was a formal triumph voted to them by the Senate. This would be the highlight of their career, something that their children and children's children would brag about for literally hundreds of years to come. Now, the Romans had an advantage due to their superior organization and discipline. So, for example, they were able to launch 2 and sometimes 3 independent armies that could pursue mutually supportive objectives. Here, for example, we see the 2 consular armies in the first phase of Rome's war against Neapolis. Publius Philo advanced directly against Neapolis and commenced the siege. The patrician consul, Cornelius Lentulus, supported his colleague's effort by pillaging and burning along the middle Volturnus River Valley. This prevented the Samnites' main force from coming to the aid of their besieged garrison in Neapolis. In the first years of the war, Roman pillaging induced the Samnites to meet the Romans on level ground, where the Romans generally prevailed. But when the Samnites realized this and withdrew to the hills, the Romans were much less effective. Fighting from their hill fortresses on high ground gave a strong tactical advantage to the defenders. However, there was an alternative way of attacking the Samnites. The gentle slope of the eastern approaches to Samnium from the Apulian plain were more favorable to an attacker. If the Romans could reach Apulia and attack the Samnites from the east, they would have much easier going. But first, the Romans would have to get to the Adriatic coast, where no Roman army had gone before. And this is exactly what the Romans did. In 325, 1 year after they captured Neapolis, the Senate sent the new plebeian consul, Junius Brutus, ancestor of the famous Brutus, who was among the assassins of Julius Caesar, to make war on this tribe of the Vestini. The Vestini were allies of the Samnites, and they controlled the narrow pass along the Alternus River. Once again, pointer. Okay, so here is the Volturnus River, and here is the Alternus Defile, where they pass through the mountains. So the Vestini controlled the Alternus Defile, which provided access to the Adriatic coast. To attack the Vestini, the Romans would have had to negotiate a rite of passage from the tribes that were standing in the way, which were the Aequi, the Marsi, and the Pelagini. When Brutus had finally reached Vestini territory near the town of Corfinum, he defeated the Vestini in open battle and then ravaged the land as much as he could, capturing their major towns, excuse me, and opened the route to the Adriatic through the Alternus River Defile. Gordon Davis, in Military History Online, commented that, quote, Roman armies were able to traverse the Alternus Defile successfully in future campaigns. It also seems to have set an example for other peoples in the area of what to expect if they attempted to hinder Roman armies trying to pass through their lands. A reference here to the famous brutality of the Roman military. We're going to see much more of this. The Romans reached the Adriatic coast and passed down to Apulia, and there they began to acquire allies. They returned with a full army in 323, and in this time, the most important city up in Apulia, which was the city of Arpi, here, came over to the Romans voluntarily. Arpi remained an important Roman ally, and 50 years later was to send a significant force, 5,000 soldiers, to assist the Romans against King Pyrrhus. Other Apulian cities were less enthusiastic about collaborating with the Romans than was Arpi, and in these instances, Rome imposed its alliance by force. A year later, in 322, the Romans were back in Apulia. By this time, the cities of Teanum Apulum and Canusium had joined Arpi as allies of Rome. As this was going on, the Samnites were actively attempting to counter Rome's efforts in Apulia, but their earlier aggressive actions there had created anti-Samnite sentiment. And in fact, there was an ethnic dimension to this as well, because the Apulians were part of the Menopin people, the Menopin language group, Iapingians. And the Samnites were Oscan speakers. And so there was, they were not ethnically from the same background. With these two forces, the town of Luceria became the major focal point of conflict. Livy tells us that the town was held by the Romans, but was being aggressively besieged by the Samnites. Then in 321, the Senate decided on a full-scale invasion of Samnium from the west. Two consular armies were combined into a single force, and they advanced from Campania into Samnium. The city of Caudium stood in their path. The Romans were to remember the result of this invasion as the gravest and most humiliating defeat in the history of the Roman Republic. This was the Battle of the Caudine Forks. According to Livy, the Romans fell victim to a Samnite disinformation operation. The Samnite commander Gaius Pontius sent spies disguised as shepherds to the vicinity of the Roman army. And Livy tells us, when the spies were interrogated by the Romans, they said that the entire Samnite army was besieging Luceria. Up here. Rome's key ally in Apulia. So the consuls resolved to rush to the relief of the city. Livy tells us, quote, 2 roads led to Luceria. The first along the Adriatic shore, flat and unobstructed, but as it was safer, so it was also the longer. The other through the Caudine Forks was shorter. This was the nature of the place. 2 deep defiles, narrow and wooded, are connected by an unbroken range of mountains on either hand. Shut in between them lies a rather extensive plain, grassy and well-watered, and with a road running through the middle of it. But before you come to it, you must enter the first defile, and afterwards either retrace the steps by which you made your way into the place, or else, should you go forward, pass out by another ravine, which is even narrower and more difficult. The Romans, Livy continues, proceeded on the road into the enclosed valley through a hollow gorge straight into the plain to the other defile. So, along this first pass, through this defile, into the plain, to the second defile. There they found the defile blocked by downed trees and an obstructing wall of huge rocks. A garrison at the head of the pass is also spotted. With quickened step, they return the way they came, but they find the return path now blocked by its own barrier and by soldiers. So, the Samnites have occupied protected positions at either end of the valley, while the Romans are trapped in the middle. Livy claims that the position was so disadvantageous that the Romans never even attempted to fight, instead reasoning to themselves, where or by what can we go? Where or by what way can we go? Do we think to remove the mountains from their seat? So long as these ridges tower over you, how shall you come at the enemy? Armed and unarmed, the brave and the cowardly, we are all alike captured and beaten men. The foe will not even draw his sword on us, that we may die with honor. He will end the war by sitting still. Gaius Pontius replied that the war was already won, and because the Romans did not know how to admit their defeat, he intended to send them unarmed and with a single garment each under the yoke. In all else, the Romans must evacuate Samnite territory and withdraw to their colonies. First, the consuls, little better than half naked, were sent under the yoke. Then their subordinates were humbled, each in the order of his rank, and then one after another, the several legions passed under the yoke. The enemy stood under arms on either side, reviling them and mocking them. Many they actually threatened with the sword, and some, whose resentment of the outrage showing too plainly on their faces, the conquerors wounded or slew outright. There are some serious, perhaps fatal, historical problems with Livy's account. Historian Stephen Oakley, who tends to believe Livy unless there is strong evidence to the contrary, thinks the Caudine Forks story is entirely invented. Historians and classicists have long combed central Italy, trying to locate the geographic features that correspond to Livy's story. This map from Gordon Davis's article in Military History Online is an example of efforts to try to rationalize Livy's account. Rejecting Livy's idea of a well-watered plain between two impassable defiles, this map suggests a third way out. We see on the left two mountain passes meeting in front of the fortified city of Caudine. The third way would have been to conduct what might be called a flight forward. This would have the army continuing east past Caudine and heading even deeper into unknown Samnite territory with little or no possibility of retreat. But even with this modification, no one has been able to find a location that could plausibly be the site of Livy's story. At this point, I want to bring another resource into the discussion, and there is a link to this as well that I posted in the chat. This is an article written by a Latin scholar named John Byron Cooner. It was published in the online magazine In Medias Res. I've pasted the link into the chat. Cooner proposes a solution to the effort to make sense of the Caudine Forks story. His argument is ingenious and, to me, quite attractive. For Cooner, the key to the puzzle is to be found in Livy's description of the Samnites' deliberations about what to do with the entrapped Romans. Gaius Pontius, the Samnite leader, was their best general, and his father, Herennius Pontius, was esteemed their wisest man. So the Samnite War Council resolved to send a messenger to Herennius to get his opinion. The old man advised that the Romans should be sent home and no injury should be done to them. This answer seemed so unsound that the army sent to Herennius a second time. This time his advice was to kill the Romans to the last man. Confused, the army sends for Herennius to come in person to explain. Herennius arrives and says that if they adopt his first plan, they would establish lasting peace and friendship with a very powerful people by conferring an enormous benefit upon them. Or by adopting his second plan, they would postpone the war for many generations, during which the Roman state, having lost two armies, would not easily regain its strength. And tertium nullum consilium, there is no third way. However, neither of these plans is accepted, and as we've seen, instead the Samnites decide to humiliate the Romans and extract a promise to withdraw from Samnite territory. Stung by the humiliation, the consuls hide in their homes for the remainder of their terms and refuse to conduct any public business. The Senate is forced to appoint a dictator just to hold new elections. The Senate repudiates the consuls and rejects the treaty they negotiated. Rome rearms and goes on to force the Samnites to submit to the power of the Roman Republic. In sum, Cooner writes, the general seeks advice, is given the advice to be absurdly generous to his enemy, refuses the advice, and is then advised to be ruthlessly murderous, and he refuses that as well. The general then crafts a hybrid approach, which ends up bringing disaster on his people. What do we have here? We have a moralizing lesson about the dangers of moderation. This is a most unusual lesson, but in war, as in other things, there are situations where the only safe options are the extreme ones. To be in the middle is the worst option of all. Cooner then proceeds to bring Machiavelli into the discussion. Many people I know have had to read The Prince as part of undergraduate humanities. but fewer people know that Machiavelli wrote an extensive commentary on Livy. As you might expect, Machiavelli, who was very concerned with moral exemplars, got the moral of the Caudine Forks perfectly right. He writes, "But most carefully should we avoid such half measures as were followed by the Samnites when they would not listen to the counsel of the old man, who urged them either to send their captives away with every honorable intention, or else to put them to death, but adopted a middle course and suffered them to depart disgraced and angered. And after no long time after, they found to their sorrow that the old man's warning was true." So the geography of the Caudine Forks is like the geography of Calypso's Island or Dante's Inferno. It is a mythic geography, an essential part of a moral tale, and moral tales were well within the purview of ancient historians. Kuna suggests that an earlier Roman writer recast the Caudine Forks story as an anti-moderation object lessons. Livy, Kuna writes, with his usual eye for the romantic and morally valuable, preferred it to whatever drier, more factual, less meaningful version he may have had at his disposal. It may contain a kernel of historical truth. The Samnites, after a great victory, may well have thrown away their victory by their moderate treatment of the vanquished. Regardless of the specific events at the Caudine Forks, there is no doubt that the Romans had sustained a major defeat. A 2-year truce was concluded with the Samnites and then extended for 2 more years. The city of Fregellae, whose colonization by the Romans was one of the major causes of the war, was returned to Samnite control. Additionally, the Romans may well have lost Collis as well. And in Apulia, Luceria was also lost to the Samnites. So I want to pause at this moment. Been going straight for about a half hour now, and open the floor for some discussion. It's a good starting point. So please, people who have comments, questions, now is a good time to step forward, and we're going to pick up again when we're done.
Now, I understand they don't really know where the Battle of Cannae took place.
There is a town called Cannae, but you well could be correct that there's confusion about that. Of course, it's 100 years after the events that we're talking about now.
Yeah, but like Livy was writing many hundreds of years after that, and they didn't have I don't think they had good maps back then, did they?
Well, they sure had good maps of Italy. The interesting thing, and the books that I'm reading make this clear, that around 300, all the sources for Roman history increase. So we have much better information about the Romans starting in around 280 than we do for anything before that. So for the wars with Hannibal, there were definitely living people who could speak to historians who were writing at that time. Livy, of course, was not alive at that time, but he relied on the work of other people who could have spoken to people who directly participated and survived that conflict. Polybius, who wrote about that, was only 1 generation away. So once again, had the chance to, and he was he was associated with the family of the Cornelii Scipioni, whose ancestor, let's just say, only 1 generation back, was among the generals who died at Cannae. So there was a lot more information available to them later. Of course, they would always exaggerate casualties, though it seems that the casualties at Cannae were gigantic on any level for ancient battle.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Macedon stuff, and I'm surprised at how small the Roman armies were up there.
How
Kind of
small
a
is
direct
small?
threat to their existence.
Well, I'm going to talk a little later about the composition of Roman army, but basically, a legion was about 4,500 soldiers. There were two legions in an army, and there were two armies, one for each consul. So that would mean under normal circumstances, the Romans would have about 16,000 men under arms, and they usually had, again, as many men that they raised from the allies. So the Romans could field an army of 40,000 men if they pulled out all the stops. That was a very large army in those days.
Okay. Which makes sense. Macedon's a long way off, and it's not a threat to their survival.
And the Romans were active in multiple theaters at the same time, and would commit all their armies only when they were making a major push, as they did at the Caudine Forks, much to their dismay.
Now, was there any evidence of Samnites uniting with Gauls and Etruscans, or there was no evidence of that, or Livy doesn't really point out to it?
That's a great point. That's a really great point. And the answer is, I'm going to actually talk about this a little later on, but just to say that that was the only hope that they had, and they didn't do it until it was too late. The Samnites themselves were more unified than other opponents that Rome fought. So, for example, the Etruscans, who were had a higher level of urbanization and economic development than the Samnites, comparable on a par with the Romans in every way, never managed to unite. The Etruscans were independent city-states, and there were some that were fighting with Rome while others continued to be allied with Rome. But the Samnites uniting across these national boundaries was just not something that they realized that they needed to do.
We did a presentation on Gladiator, obviously, watching the movie and commenting on it. What pissed Roman off really badly is and then they really pointed out by having a gladiator called Samnite, right? They had a gladiator in the beginning that's actually called Samnite, and there was other names that are not related to a particular, I mean, there was Gauls, obviously, but there was no Etruscan, gladiator. It was just, there was a Samnite gladiator, meaning that they wanted to defy that name in the beginning until it was.
But also notice that it meant that Samnite had a reputation for being a strong fighter, that they had respect, right? The Greeks were despised typically by the Romans for being all talk and no action and squabbling with each other. But the Samnites were put forward as an example of a martial people who, though they were Roman enemies, still were people that the Romans respected as brave warriors. So they made them the stereotype for one of their classes of gladiator. There was another class of gladiator called the Thracian for the same reason. And a bit of a diversion, but I've very often when you read about the slave result of Spartacus, you read that Spartacus was a Thracian. But stuff that I've read suggests that really what that means is that Spartacus, as a gladiator, fought as in the role of the Thracian gladiator, and he himself says nothing about his actual ethnicity. And it's much more likely, given what he was able to accomplish, that Spartacus was a disgraced Roman who had had military training in the legions, rather than being a barbarian Thracian who just somehow was able to unite a huge army and fight effectively against the Romans for a long period of time.
Well, I know from reading up on the Gladiators, there was no attempt to line people's ethnicity up with with the roles they were playing in the arena. The impression I got, though, is the Samnites were popular during the Republic, and they disappeared pretty quickly during the Empire because the Gladiator class was insulting Samnites, and they felt they shouldn't do that. It was okay before. There was an understanding somewhere along, I mean, maybe you'll get to this. There was some understanding the Samnites were carrying all kinds of cute, pretty weapons with gold trim, and Romans are contemptuous of that. What really matters is courage. And at the end of the battle, the courageous guys, like the Romans, will be in possession of the gold armor. And to some extent, one explanation for gladiator combat, for the original gladiator combats, is that the Campanians were finding a way to degrade and humiliate the Samnites when they captured them.
Yeah, this is
Not the
the
only
comment I'll
explanation.
make on these classes of gladiator, that in my mind, it's like the difference between a running back and a wide receiver, right? They represent, the assets that they brought to fight with in the arena and have nothing to do with ethnicity.
But
Yeah.
I think in Ludium, it seems like in a prison. It seems that the division has to happen by groups, and it's the ethnicity is a very natural kind of way how to unite. And we do know that the Crixus, who was a Gaul, and he did unite mostly Gaulish, the ethnically Gauls. Gladiators around him. That we know. I'm not sure about like this idea, but that Spartacus was not ethnically Thracian. I don't know. It's kind of hard to, but it seems that the idea that they would have groups divided by ethnicity seems like pretty genuine to me. It seems. I mean, because that's what I when they created this series about Spartacus. Which most of it, especially the first 3 seasons, they're not exactly historical, but the imaginary representation of what it was like to be part of the gladiatorial school, I felt kind of real to me to some extent. Some ideas, some psychological, grouping there.
Yeah. Be careful though. A lot of the really formal definition of gladiators is probably early empire. So back in the day, during the Republic, if you wanted to have some guys fight to the death, you'd grab a couple of prisoners of war and hand them appropriate kit and have them fight. And in none of those conditions, you could have Samnites and Gauls fight to the death. You wouldn't be anywhere near Thrace at this period of time.
No, at that time, I think Samnites. Samnites already integrated.
When we hit the 1st century AD, the Samnites are part of Italy. It's all part of the empire. They're not capturing Thracians.
Yeah,
So they don't
even
necessarily have
BC.
Thracian slaves. So it's a case of, oh, you look to me like a Thracian. Here's your armor.
No, I think at the time of Spartacus, Samnites were not a separate group at all. I think they were already kind of integrated into the Roman society.
Well,
I mean, they were Italics, but because that was the time of the social war too. But they were Italics, but the Italics had not the full Roman citizen, but partial Roman citizenship. So they were kind of.
Let's point out that the Samnites were one of the few Roman peoples that were receptive to Hannibal. And they were also the one of the major peoples that participated, rebelled against Rome in the social wars, and they were mountain people, and they were slow to give up their habits, and they were resented by the Romans, and they resented the Romans.
And by the way, because they were mostly mountain people, it seems that ultimately they didn't have a chance to stand up to Rome, because expanding Rome, because of you cannot, your population is very limited. Mountains can sustain a very low density of population. while Rome, that was on a plain plus expanding into the Campania, it seemed like had much more manpower available eventually. That's what I think. What do you think?
I think that's correct. And in addition, Rome had the political technology to create new citizens. And the primary thing that Rome got out of creating new citizens was that they had to serve in the army. So that was really one of the distinctive characters of Rome, of why Rome came to dominate the world, was that specific ability to create new citizens and have them serve in the military. So maybe at this point, I'm going to start sharing again, and I'll go back and we'll finish this presentation. Okay, everybody back to the screen?
Yep.
Okay, so this was where we left. We're in this period of the Caudine Peace. After the disaster of the Caudine Forks, Rome has taken it on the chin.
I think it's not expanded. It's kind of not the full screen. I don't know, maybe you could.
Yeah, I think it's a comment screen.
Oh,
Paul.
okay, hold on. Let me go back and
You can pinch it out though.
let me do this again.
By the way, I just wanted to mention while Paul is getting it up, if you guys wanted to participate in discussion, we have a good turnout today, but enough people so we can have a live discussion. So whenever you have a question for Paul, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, how are we doing? Is this better?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, as I said, Rome had taken it on the chin and had lost its strategic places. Fregellae, probably Callus as well, definitely Luceria. Yet, despite this major defeat, Rome continued to consolidate its gains in other directions. In 319, only 1 year after the Caudine Forks disaster, Rome added 2 new tribes to the Roman state. Recall that Roman tribes were strictly geographical, where membership was determined solely by where a person lived. Adding new tribes was like finding a new congressional district. It meant that a new group of citizens could now participate in the Roman assemblies by electing magistrates and voting on laws. Yesterday's colonists had become today's Roman voters. So my point is, despite this humiliating and devastating defeat, the Romans were continuing their effort to build their state and to use the political tools that they had developed to expand Rome beyond its city-state limitations. Following the Battle of the Caudine Forks, which was called the Caudine Peace, the Romans refrained from attacking the Samnites directly, but they continued military activities elsewhere, particularly in Apulia. After the Samnites had gained control of Luceria, some of the cities aligned with Rome had begun to defect. The Romans campaigned vigorously in Apulia to bring them back under Roman control. Open hostilities between the Romans and the Samnites resumed in 316. In Apulia, the Romans succeeded in retaking Luceria and reestablishing control of the Apulian cities. In Campania, the Romans boosted their morale by taking the Samnite fortress at Saticula. and this boosted Roman morale, but they failed to notice a large Samnite buildup was happening in the Liris Valley. In 315, disaster struck again. The Samnites took the Roman fortress of Sora in the north, in the Liris Valley, and then advanced to the seacoast. With the consular armies engaged elsewhere, the Romans cobbled together an army to face the Samnite incursion and suffered a major defeat at Lutuli. The Samnites then thrust north as far as Ardea, recruiting Volscians and other unwilling Roman subjects along the way. This was Rome's darkest hour in the Samnite Wars. Roman territory had been cut in half, and communication between Rome and the Campania was lost. It was Rome's second major defeat by the Samnites in 6 years. But the Romans were far from beaten. In 314, they combined all their forces and launched a counteroffensive against the Samnites at Terracina, resulting in a decisive victory for the Romans. Samnite casualties were reported as 30,000 by Livy and a more realistic 10,000 by Dionysius of Halicarnassus. This was a staggering blow to the Pentri tribe, who made up the main Samnite force. The Romans then moved south against the Aurunci, who had joined the Samnites. And according to Livy, the Aurunci henceforth ceased to exist as a separate people. In 313, Roman resurgence turned into a flood. Once again, Rome established new colonies at strategic places. In Apulia, a colony at Lusaria consolidated Roman control of Apulia. And you see the other cities that were Roman allies or Roman colonies. Back on the west flank, Siticula, which Rome had taken, commanded the Samnite route into Campania. Suessa Aurunca and the island of, where's Suessa Aurunca? That's somewhere here. And there it is, Suessa Aurunca. And the island of Pontia helped secure the north-south route. Added to this were two extremely important cities captured after difficult sieges. Fregellae in the Liris Valley, which had been the trigger for the war, and the pro-Samnite Campanian town of Nola were captured by the Romans at this time. By 312, as you can see, Samnium was encircled by military allies of Rome and was confronted in the sensitive Liris Volturnus region, which is here, by a string of Latin colonies on strategic sites stretching from Fregellae to Siticula. Also in 312, a major new development, the Via Appia, the first advanced Roman road. Rome now had secure and rapid communications with her territories in the south. The Via Appia symbolizes the Republic's determination to impose its will on the very landscape as well as on its enemies. The road ran straight as an arrow across the Pontine Plain. Here. And as I mentioned before, the Pontine Plain was infested with malaria. So the Romans built 45 miles of raised causeway to get the road above the level of the swamp and make it less dangerous to travel from north to south. Another development usually assigned to this period is the emergence of the manipular legion. This was probably a gradual process that developed in tandem with Rome's expansion in the mid-300s, perhaps accelerated by the need for the legions to operate in the hill country of Samnia. Maniples were small units. Literally in Latin, it means a handful. So maniples were small units consisting of 160 men, that is 2 centuries. They could navigate uneven ground without losing cohesion and were capable of independent maneuver. 30 maniples comprised the legion, and there were 2 legions in each of the consular armies. This was the formation that the Romans used down through the 1st century BC. It was the formation with which they defeated the Hellenic armies, both of Pyrrhus and later Macedonians. They defeated the Macedonian Phalanx, which had never before been defeated with the Manipular Legion. From this point on, the Samnite War ceased to be Rome's principal concern. Other theaters of war now predominated, first in Etruria and Umbria, Etruria, and then in the mountainous region of central Italy. Livy tells us that a coalition of inland Etruscan cities laid siege to the Roman city of Sutrium in 311. The outnumbered Romans withstood the initial onslaught behind their fortifications. Then, in the small hours of the morning, they sortied. This took the Etruscans completely by surprise and inflicted mass casualties while driving them back to Etruria. The Romans pursued the Etruscans up the Tiber Valley and received the surrender of the Etruscan cities. Livy tells us that Rome's main objective at this time was to conquer central Italy. In 307, the Senate resolved to build a second new style high-tech road to this time to the Adriatic. The Adriatic, originally this was called the Via Tiberidum, but later when it was extended, it was rebranded, as they would say now, and called the Via Valeria. In 304, the Romans launched a terror attack against the Aequi, part of their process of building the Via Valeria. And in only 50 days, the Romans burned all of their towns and massacred the population. Modern scholars refer to this as the Aequian genocide. The neighboring people of the Abruzzi region, the Marsi, the Palegni, the Marachini, and the Frentani, watched this and quickly concluded permanent treaties with Rome. These military successes were consolidated by the establishment of new colonies at Sora. Let's zoom in a little bit. So Sora, north of Fregellae, at the further up in the Liris Valley, at Albufusens, which is right on the Via Valeria, at Carcioli, also there, and at Nequinum, which is in the north in the Umbrian territory. Previously captured towns were next and given Roman second-tier citizenship, the civitas sine suffragio. Let's pull back a little. And in 299, new Roman voting tribes were created on land taken from the Aequi and the Arunci. land taken in 314. So in 15 years, the colonists became citizens, even though actually in this case, these were not colonists, these were the conquered people, and they were became second-class citizens, but this was in some certain sense kind of like a halfway house to full citizenship. And for the Romans, it meant that they had certain Roman rights, legal protections, the right to have recognized legal marriages where their heirs could inherit legally, and the right to do business with Roman citizens and have legally valid contracts. Tim Cornell writes that, quote, "These acts of annexation and enfranchisement mark the end of a further stage in Rome's conquest of Italy. The process of expansion had by now developed its own momentum. The logical result was Roman domination of the entire Italian peninsula. This outcome could only have been averted by positive and concerted action by the peoples who still retained their independence. The turn of the century became the first time that they began to make serious efforts to organize a united front against Rome." In 298, a war with the Samnites broke out for the third time. Hostilities started when Rome concluded alliances with the Lucanians in the south, and this provoked the Samnites to attack. You may have noticed up until this point that the Lucanians were the only people that the Romans had not been able to get to cooperate in isolating the Samnites, though they had tried. Now they succeeded, and the Samnites were basically forced to react. A year later, the Roman commander in Etruria reported to the Senate that a grand coalition had been formed in northern Italy, including Samnites, Etruscans, Umbrians, and Gauls. The anti-Roman coalition assembled near the Umbrian town of Sentinum. Leaving forces in reserve, the consuls Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus and Publius Decius Mus combined their forces and marched north to Samnium. And you may remember the name Publius Decius Mus from my previous discussion. This is the son of the Publius Decius Mus, who earned the grass crown twice for his actions in his heroism in saving Roman armies, and later committed an act called devotio, which was essentially a form of suicide, where in the heat of the battle, feeling that the Romans were losing, it's a ritual where he commended the enemy and himself to the gods of the underworld and charged right into the heart of the enemy, was quickly slain, but the Romans then prevailed.
Paul.
Yeah.
Quick, just clarify, who are the Gauls? And where are they on the map? I don't see them.
Yeah, they're the arrow coming in from the north. And unfortunately, my map doesn't extend that far, but we're talking about the Gauls who lived in the Po Valley.
Okay, is this any relation to the Gauls of France, or no, completely
No,
different?
this is the Gauls. Well, originally, yes. I mean, they're Celtic peoples. They speak Celtic languages, and these were people that had come across the Alps into what the Romans called Cisalpine Gaul. So that meant Gaul on this side of the Alps, where the other side of Gaul was called Transalpine Gaul, Gaul on the other side of the Alps.
Are they part of that invasion at the end of the beginning of the 4th century, right? BC?
Well, we don't know who really were part of that invasion. They were Gauls. So the odds are very good that the answer is yes. but we don't know for sure.
Yeah, like did they settle in Cisalpine area before that invasion, or they settled there as a result of it? What do you?
They
you
were
know?
there before. That's where
okay.
that's where they were recruited. So I mentioned in that presentation that the Gauls were being actively recruited by the Sicilian Greeks, by the Syracusans specifically, to come to Syracuse as mercenaries. And that's where the Greeks went to find them. And the theory which I found attractive is that the Gauls who sacked Rome in 390 BC were actually a mercenary army that was traveling from their home in the Po Valley to reach Sicily to serve as mercenaries under Greek leadership to fight against the Carthaginians and the rival Greek cities.
Oh, one simple, maybe additional question. Maybe if you come to that, you can stop me. So Etruscans ended up, trying to hire the Gauls, right? And
No,
there was a
I'm saying the Greeks tried to hire the Gauls.
But there was an episode where Etruscans also tried to recruit them, and then there was a misunderstanding where Gauls thought that they were recruiting them to, to just not pillage their areas. Instead, the Etruscans wanted to recruit them to fight Rome, and there was a misunderstanding, in that regard. Have you heard anything like that, or there was none of that? None of that came.
It sounds. I mean, the point that I made earlier, which is that the year 300 BC is like a watershed in the level of actual source material that we have. So the point is that our material for anything earlier than 300 BC is so sketchy that there's very little that we can say that's not really a theory. And in particular, stories of specific interactions involving specific individuals, particularly non-Roman individuals, are very likely to be embroideries or legendary tales that were then picked up by later historians, and that was all they had to go on. So we know that some of the Romans that are mentioned in these earlier accounts are historical because we see their names in surviving records called the Fasti, which are the lists of the Romans who held consular office and the list of Romans that were granted triumphs. And this is a genuine historical document that relates, that goes back to the 5th century BC. So we know some of these Roman names are real. And in fact, that's one of the primary sources. You'd be amazed at how many conclusions historians and classical scholars make just by tracing the names of these people, their family relations, the alliances between different families, the identification of patrician names versus plebeian names, and what this says about the struggle between the patricians and the plebeians, all based on this very meager information of their list of names. There is a story where there was where the Gauls were involved in Etruria, and the Romans sent an embassy who then intervened on the side of the locals. And the Gauls were enraged by this because they thought it was a betrayal, and then they attacked Rome. But as I said, stories then involve particular individuals and particular interactions and speeches between them. There's very little possibility that stuff is historically real. So back here to
may I
yeah, go ahead.
ask a question? So how or what can you talk about in terms of gens and gentes and a branch of gens called a stirp in connection to the families?
Okay, Stirk, I'm not sure what that, I'm not familiar with that, but the gens or the gons, as Latins might say, gens, is means the clan, and clans were not strictly families. They were groups of families that were related into a clan or a tribe, if you will. But as I say, there were leading families among them, but they were not all related. The Johns is basically the main name that Romans used to identify the main branch of their family. It was the second name that Romans used. So if you have somebody like, as you see right here on, so one of the consuls in this battle at Sentinum were Quintus Fabius Maximus Rullianus. Fabius is the gens. So when we talk about the Fabian family, and Maximus is the cognomen, basically means the great or the large. So it was used as a branch of the Fabian family. And that is what the scholars study when they look at these lists of names. So I talked before about the consul Brutus. Brutus is the name of, I'm sorry, Brutus is not the name of the gens. It's the Junii are the gens, right? So the conspirator who was one of the murderers of Caesar was Marcus Junius Brutus. Junius is the family name. Brutus means the brute, quite literally. His ancestor was the first consul of the Republic back in around 500 BC. So these were the family names, and you can recognize certain gens names as being patrician gens and others as being plebeian gens, as in Publius Decius is the gens, mus, which means mouse, Decius the mouse. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that because so many names are repetitive, or parts of names are repetitive, and so that it's now much easier to understand that maybe they all originated from a particular family, and as they continue their warring.
Yeah, I mean the actual origin of these people were as essentially aristocratic warlords before the establishment of the Republic. So they were clan leaders, independent warlords with their own retainers, their clients, and then they became these leading heads of gens under the Republic. Okay, so back to the campaign at Sentinum. So the anti-Roman coalition, where we have the Samnites coming up from the south, we have the Gauls coming down from the north, we have the Etruscans coming from the west, and the Umbrians from the southwest. They all started assembling around the Umbrian city of Sentinum. So the Romans, the two consuls, combined their forces into a single army and marched north to Sentinum. Concerned about the size of the enemy force, now let's come in again. The consuls Fabius ordered the reserve army to devastate the countryside in the direction of the Etruscan city of Clusium. This was a diversionary tactic, and it quickly resulted in the Etruscans and the Umbrians abandoning Sentinum and hurrying back home to protect their people. Once again, the famous brutality and cruelty of the Romans was a strong, militarily effective piece of part of their arsenal, if you will. You were not going to be comfortable leaving your family at home when the Romans were coming. And so that left the Samnites and the Gauls to face the Romans alone. So this kicked off the Battle of Sentinum. Tim Cornell writes, there can be little doubt that in terms of the forces engaged, the ferocity of the fighting and the decisiveness of the result, Sentinum was the greatest military engagement that had ever taken place in Italy. This is kind of a reasonably historically accurate depiction of what the armies of that day looked like. You can see that they did not wear the sort of armor that you see in the more Empire Roman armies, the segmented steel armor. They had a steel pot, they had a pot on their heads, which might have been steel, might have been bronze. They had wooden shields. You can see the Gauls wearing their striped pajama pants. And I mentioned before Publius Decius Mus, the son, now did the same thing as his father. He committed this ritual called devotio, in which he devoted the enemy to the underworld. He devoted himself to the underworld. He charged into the middle. And this, by the way, is considered to be a historically accurate event, something that really happened. The Romans prevailed at the Battle of Sentinum. The Battle of Sentinum sealed the fate of Italy. After the battle, the Romans lost no time in settling accounts with the Etruscans and the Umbrians. In 293, the Romans inflicted a crushing defeat on the Samnites and overran Samnium in 292. In 290, the Samnites surrendered and became allies of Rome on unequal terms. The Gauls returned and won a victory over the Romans, but were decisively defeated in 284. Fighting continued in Etruria, but the conquest was complete by the time the Romans suppressed the result in 264. So we come to the end of my presentation. The Republic's next great challenge was imminent. King Pyrrhus of Epirus landed on Italian soil in 280 BC, and he fully expected to make quick work of the obnoxious barbarians who called themselves Romani. And there you have it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. So interesting. I was
Thank you.
looking
Great-
at
Great
the
graphics.
sheet. Yeah, the shields that the soldiers used remind me so much of the Vikings. And of course, the connectedness, since the Vikings did make their way into ancient, the city-states of what is now Italy.
Yeah, there is a tradition that the Italians preferred these rectangular shields to the circular shields that were used by the Greek hoplites and by the Vikings as well, as I believe. But there had to be a basic similarity because the materials that they had to work with were
Available, sure.
limited. So, the shield has to be light enough for you to carry, which means that it essentially had to be made of wood. We think of shields sometimes being made of solid metal. You could not have lifted that shield. Shields were made of wood, and they would have a bronze band around the outer edge to keep it from shattering, and a bronze boss in the middle that you could use to smash somebody in the face. And sometimes more elaborate shields would have a thin plating of bronze on the outside, but fundamentally they were made of wood, and it was just a question of the level of technology of the peoples in terms of how elaborate these things were, how uniform they were, and how finished they were.
It's also a question of what the enemy is going to do to you. It sounds to me like the Italians threw a lot more javelins than everybody else did.
Did a lot more what?
Threw a lot more javelins around. Like if people are throwing stuff and shooting stuff at you, you want a relatively large, lightweight shield that will deflect her. Don't forget, with a shield like that with a single handle, you don't hold the shield rigidly in front of the enemy's weapon. You turn the shield and deflect the attack. The best if someone's coming at you with an axe, the best outcome is that he stumbles past you off balance.
Well, keep in mind that the great revolution in warfare was initiated by the Greeks, which was the creation of the heavy infantry hoplite phalanx. So previous to that, all warfare was of the type you just described, which was largely missile weapons, javelins, and arrows. So the Greeks were an aberration, essentially, who changed the European mode of combat and were the first people to introduce really effective heavy infantry. Having effective heavy infantry required a lot more drill and a lot more coordination and discipline, because you had to stand there in the face of the enemy. You had to allow the enemy to approach 3 or 4 feet away, as opposed to keeping them at a distance. So the less developed peoples were more likely to be using javelins and slings and arrows. Though none of this is strictly true. The fact is that the Gauls had very advanced metalworking technology. The famous Roman steel blade, the gladius, was something that they learned from the Spanish. And the Spanish were, once again, barbarians. And one of the great positive qualities of the Roman military was their willingness to learn from their enemies and to adopt technologies and tactics that their enemies used against them, and evolve as a military force and keep becoming ever more effective.
Paul, thanks for superb presentation. I have a question. What type of tactics and what type of formations were Romans adversaries used in the Sentinum battle?
Good question, for which there's no answer. Specific descriptions of how the Romans were organized, there's really none of them until Polybius. And Polybius describes the really mature Roman 3-line, the triple axis is what Arcus is what they call it, the manipular army in which there is 3 lines of heavy infantry, the hastati, the primari, and they're basically arranged in age sequence, with the youngest troops in the front line, and Polybius describes them as having this kind of checkerboard formation that you've probably seen in many movies and things like that. My sense, and what military historians say about this, is that this was not really a practical formation to use in actual combat, because you were exposing your flanks. So they felt that the Romans used this checkerboard manipular formation as a way of traveling to battle, both on the road and actually maneuvering on the battlefield, as opposed to a phalanx, which would form up in one long, massive line and then have to advance to contact with the enemy and becoming totally disorganized in the process of doing that. Whereas the manipular army with these smaller groups could follow the lay of the terrain, and then because they were highly drilled and everybody knew their position in the line, they could form up into a solid line at essentially the last minute and be in good order to meet the assault. So what I'm saying is that there are no descriptions really until somebody like Caesar of the tactics that were actually deployed on the battlefield. You have this description from Polybius, but it's not a description of the Roman army actually conducting operations. And the military people who've looked at it don't really believe that an army could effectively fight in the formation described by Polybius. And before that, it's really all conjecture based on, to some extent, the archaeological discovery of specific weapons, but there's nothing about it in the sources. There's nothing written about how they conducted battle.
Thanks.
Excellent presentation, Paul. I guess going back to that question I had about Gauls, were Gauls known to be, kind of like pulling on their promises and misconstruing their intentions?
Well, I think the Gauls were being depicted as being almost subhuman by the Romans. The Gauls scared the living daylights out of the Romans for centuries. I mean, Roman children, that was the boogeyman. When parents wanted to scare their children, they would say the Gauls are coming to get you. They were seen, the Gauls came and they had like dreadlocks because they used a lye on their hair and they painted their faces. And some of their members came to battle almost naked, and they were ferocious, and they were the really archetypical barbarians. So they were certainly uneducated. Were they dumb? No, they weren't dumb. They were human beings, and human beings are not on a large scale dumb. Human beings are the same across all their ethnic groups. They're just conditioned by their cultural milieu. So the Gauls were reputed as fabulously, one thing, the Gauls were physically bigger than the Romans. The Romans tended to be, I think a tall Roman was someone who was, 5'6". And the Gauls were seen as being, in comparison, giants, much larger. But I think other than that, the Romans were more sophisticated, largely through their exposure to the Greeks, and so there's a lot of propaganda here.
Oh, I see. That's interesting, and also the fact that Etruscan disuniting themselves and not able to put the united front versus Rome is completely kind of like makes me surprised that didn't they see that coming? I mean, how is that? Samnites are uniting themselves, and the Roman, and against Romans, but the Etruscans are not. Like they're living.
Let me ask: Did the Greeks do much better?
Yeah,
the Greeks didn't, but then you have And again, that's probably another question I'm leading in. You have somebody like, from the east coming in, Antiochus, and who is trying to unite them, right? Then you have, Philip V is trying to unite
Well,
them.
slow down. They're really not comparable, because what you have with the Etruscans are independent city-states. They are different countries. The country of Veii is a different country from the country of Caere or Vortumnus or Clusium. They're independent states just as much as Athens and Sparta and Thebes were independent states, and they had shifting alliances. And they considered their near neighbors potential enemies, and frequently would unite with people outside their group in order to defend themselves against their near neighbors.
Yeah.
So it was only rare people in those days that could think of uniting. Now you had the phenomenon of a conquering king, and that's where you get Antiochus and Seleucus and Philip on the model of Alexander. But these were not independent polities like like the Etruscan states or the Greek states. These were military royal monarchies where people had been brought into the alliance by force, but they were never seen to be part of the same group. They were subjects. So the king, the great king, could mobilize all his subjects. So we see, for example, the Persians, their army was huge, but it consisted of lots of individual pieces, each under their own leadership, each speaking their own language. And it was similar in the Asian armies. And in this, the culture of the Etruscans, not accidentally, I mean, the Etruscans were hugely Hellenized directly by the Greeks. And this is some trait that they shared with the Greeks, and I can't see that as being accidental. This is part of their self-identity. My identity is I am a Clusiite. I am not an Etruscan, right? I'm an Athenian. I'm not a Greek.
But Clusium, isn't that, am I confusing? I thought it was Latin city, no?
No, it's right in the middle of Etruria.
What's the
Show it to you on the
Latin?
map.
Yeah, but there was a Latin city, very similar to name.
They have a lot of similar names, and that's very confusing to historians because there were cases where there's cities in Latium and they're also in the Liris Valley, and it does cause a lot of confusion.
I have another question. When Romans fought Samnites, they learned this Healy, or what you mentioned, I forget the name of the tactics. They work, the attacking tribes are on the heel, or the army that's on the heel. And then they use that against Antiochus, and then they use it against the Philip V, which they were kind of thought that that's not possible, especially in the Thermopylae, when there was, Antiochus was waiting for them at Thermopylae, and he completely misjudged Romans, and they knew how to already fight the tribes on the mountains and the hills and going up, and had created that army regiment that was able to do that. Can you comment on that a little bit?
Well, I mean, the comment that I'll make is that the Romans were a really highly militarized society, and the level of participation in the military by the Romans was astronomical compared with the ancient world, let alone the modern world. And that was the primary basis on which their leaders were selected, was their competence as military leaders. And they were constantly at war. The Romans were almost never at peace with their neighbors. And they had a very competitive system for achieving the highest office, in which it was a pyramid with only two consuls at the top. And so as you would, and they could only hold office for a year. So as you would get to a higher and higher office, there were fewer and fewer available positions, which made the competition very, very intense. And what it tended to do was to produce very competent people who had to really, prove themselves. And Tim Cornell comments that it's even more pronounced during this period because you see in the 300s, people who reached the consulship 4 times, 5 times. It's very unusual, indicating that the Romans essentially during this period had a relatively smaller group of very competent, probably charismatic individuals who were a leadership class within the leadership. So the Romans, therefore, I'm saying they prided themselves on their ability as military leaders. They started their, Roman essentially had to spend, was it 20 years in the army? You had to have served for 10 years before you could stand for office. And you came up from this, if you were an aristocrat, you started as a military tribune or perhaps a legate, and you would rise through these ranks. So you had in the vast majority of cases, you had a lot of experience on the battlefield and seeing other commanders and seeing people learn to improvise on the battlefield and deal with, disadvantageous circumstances. Like, the Romans suffered trying to attack people on heights. Everybody did. The high ground confers a military advantage. And in fact, the Romans learned siegecraft from the Greeks, even though the Romans mastered siegecraft just as they mastered naval warfare and defeated the Carthaginians, and mastered mountain warfare and defeated the Samnites. But that's kind of who the Romans were. They were this really kind of hubristic people. They believed there was nothing that they were not capable of. They thought being a Roman was something special, and they kind of made that into the truth. They, you hear about the Romans later talking about how they despised kings because they were not Roman citizens, because they were not free. The Romans thought that they were free men involved in a free competition, and they thought that anybody that served the king was a slave.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So they had this, and not every Roman was a qualified general. Romans made huge blunders again and again and again. But there was this tendency for qualified people to boil to the top. To a certain extent, that happens to all armies. In an extended warfare, there's nothing that gets rid of commanders like defeat on the battlefield.
Right. Like the good example would be, obviously the fight against Hannibal, right? When he was courting the consular who was an idiot versus the other one who was much more capable.
We just look at the American Civil War. Right. The time servers don't win battles. And ultimately, Ulysses S. Grant becomes the commander in chief.
That makes sense. Anybody else have any questions? Greg?
Yeah. I actually, by the way, believe it or not, I confused Clusium with Tusculum because there was a period at the same time. You remember Tarquinius trying to reconquer Rome, and first he united with Clusium, and then he united with Tusculum. So that's why I got me. Yeah, but I remember now because it was Lars Porsena who was the king.
Right, he was from Clusium. That's right.
Right. He was a king of Clusium. Yeah,
but he was an Etruscan.
It was Etruscan, yeah. It was
Right.
Etruscan, yes, of course,
Right.
yeah. No,
And-
you were right. I'm just saying that.
Yeah, no, and
Why
it's,
did I think that it was a Latin city? I mean,
and I mean, the names are always confusing. I mean, I know for myself that one reason I've never been interested in Chinese history is because I cannot distinguish the names from each other, either of the places or the people. So call me a chauvinist, but I, with just being unable to make sense of that sort of stuff, I think makes it more difficult for you to maintain your interest and to become a serious student. The
I guess-
Romans made it a little worse with their names because even with their first names, there were just a limited number of names that would be used within a family. So, for example, among the Julii Caesars, the first son would be Gaius, and the next one would be Sextus, and then they were kind of out of luck after that.
That's crazy.
but I just also want to say, like, when you look and what you were saying about the Etruscans, similar to Greeks, I mean, that was probably the winning strategy for Rome, because that they were like building a nation, starting from Rome, and then this inclusive kind of giving even a partial citizenship, and kind of like building a nation. So they were always growing and expanding. I mean, Greeks could never, like, as you were talking about how the Etruscans behaved, just reminded me that during the Peloponnesian War, Spartans allied with Persians. I mean, this is like, this is completely crazy. This is like, it used to be a common enemy, but no, they united with Persians. And actually, it's because of the Persians that they managed to, Persians gave them money and they built the fleet and that's how they won the war. Who knows if without Persians, it may not have happened. Yeah, so there is something in I think, in the Roman character, in this like character archetypal kind of thing built in that period of time, specifically at the time of the early Republic. That's when it was really kind of solidified to kind of being stable, and just like go to your purpose, go to the goal, steady, things like that, and kind of inclusive, and creating this national identity kind of slowly. I think that's really what made them great.
The other thing at the same time to keep in mind was that the Roman state was fundamentally predatory. So if you participated in Rome, I mean, one historian said that what the Romans would essentially do is they would mug somebody. And then they would say, well, you can get it back by joining the gang. And then you can share with us when we go mug somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that was essentially the way the Romans operated. They were able to avoid the intense factional warfare, even though we know that there was this huge conflict between the plebeians and the patricians in Rome. It was nothing like what happened in the Greek cities, because in the Greek cities, the faction would call foreigners in to help them against their own city. And the Romans never did that. The Romans always found a way to negotiate, and by negotiate, I don't mean necessarily peaceful negotiations, but they found a way to resolve at least enough of their differences to make common ground. And the way they did that was by stealing from everybody else and distributing the proceeds. So once Rome became hooked on doing that, they couldn't stop. They needed to expand, because that was the Greece. The influx of slaves in particular was, and new land. I mean, you could take your poor people and you could give them a decent life by taking somebody else's land and sending them out as colonists. And they say, okay, now you used to be a poor man. Now you've got so many acres, and we're actually going to give you an ox and whatever you need to be a farmer, and so maybe we killed all the Arunci in order to do that. Well, they got in our way, so this was the right thing to do. And so so you have to look at the Romans from both sides. They had this internal cohesiveness in which they had more social mobility than a lot of other civilizations, but they were also a very unpleasant neighbor to have around. They were very aggressive, acquisitive, expansive, and they couldn't, once they started doing it, they were addicted. They couldn't stop.
And by the way, coming back to this Manipula formation, I think it was developed during those Samnite wars, right? When they started to use.
They don't actually know. I mean, all they can say is that they know that there was some point at which the Romans had a manipular army, so it had to start somewhere. It's just like like the beginning of life. Here's life. Yeah. Some time ago there wasn't life, right. So some point in time, life had to come from nothing. So the Manipular Legion had to come from somewhere. There's no real good evidence that would let them say when it was. So they reasoned that when they started having to do this large-scale warfare in bad terrain, that this very much would have favored an army that could have small, independently maneuverable units. That could move on the battlefield without losing cohesion, and the Romans always had this well-deserved reputation for internal organization. So, the level of the chain of command in the Roman army was similar to the chain of command in a modern army. They had non-commissioned officers on different levels, down to the level of what we might in modern military call a squad. So you could come up with very elaborate organization. So the later Roman army, people know that when the Roman army built a camp, that everybody knew exactly where their tent was going to be.
Yeah.
Everybody knew exactly what this camp was going to look like before they built it. Whereas they're fighting people who had no such organization of that sort.
You think the Manipulas became eventually centuries, right? I think something like that.
Well, no, the centuries came first. The maniples were made up of centuries, 2 centuries in each maniple.
But the maniple was okay. But maniple
so
is like 120
goes all the way
men.
back. The century goes all the way back to Servius Tullius, the king of Rome, the third to the last king of Rome,
right,
who created the Centuriate Assembly. Right, the Centuriate Assembly was originally a military recruiting mechanism. So the centuries are very old. The centuries go back to the time when Rome.
But the word century means kind of 100, right? And the Manipula was 120.
160, because the centuries, ended up meaning like 80 men instead of 100 men.
Yeah, I see. All right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, yeah, this the early times, not much known. We're just operating on this. Yeah, and I also, by the way, yeah, it's interesting how Gauls expanded. Yeah, I looked it up. They apparently mixed up with Ligurians. Ligurians were in northern Italy, like Aboriginal, more of an Aboriginal population, right. and a lot of them also like Veneti, and they eventually kind of mixed up. They've been influenced by Celtic culture, and they became kind of half and half, whatever mixture. And yeah, but the ones that invaded Rome in 387, whatever, they originally come beyond the Alps, from the modern France area, and then they, of course, recruited among the local Celtic tribe Gauls and continued. Yeah, interesting.
Can I ask a question? I guess pose a question. So I'm doing this presentation on sexuality in Rome. Is there a movie on Tarquinium and that famous rape that he had, or alleged rape? Is there any kind of movie that we can probably discuss?
Of Lucretia?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was his son, right? It's not himself, right? It was his son.
Not
Who,
himself, right.
I'm not aware of any movies on that subject.
there are definitely paintings.
Oh, sure.
There's a painting by
Yeah.
Let me ask, I got an expert here on opera, so hold on one second. I'll be right back.
Yeah, but that would be a good plot for a movie. I would be surprised if there is nothing like in Italian movies. Maybe it never, it seems such an important theme.
So I'm thinking of replacing that with maybe an opera discussion, or maybe a plot for a movie type of thing, which is going to make it interesting in that regard, right? We could then have a discussion on an opera or the movie of the Tarquinian famous rape of Lucretia, Crim's son, famous.
So my wife, who is formerly an opera singer, tells me that there are operas on that topic.
Right.
You got to imagine that, having talking about an opera with history. I mean, operas were like cartoons compared to history. Really, I mean, there's zilch historical in an opera. Just kind of, the opera is like an excuse to get up there and parade around in a costume and have a melodrama in which everybody dies at the end and so forth.
That's true. That's true. So I'm gonna incorporate, I guess, if there is any kind of Metropolitan opera that was there, and I can play it maybe a little bit off YouTube as part of this presentation.
Yeah, I mean, you'll have to do some research to find which one it is. My wife didn't know which one offhand. She just recalled that it existed.
Yes, I have vaguely heard something like that in regard, but maybe there's an Italian movie I can just dig out somewhere.
Oh, there's a relatively recent one by Benjamin Britten.
Benjamin
He's a
Britten.
20th century composer.
Oh, he sounds very famous. He's like that guy.
Well, listen, I'm sure it will be easier to discuss movie because not that many people will listen to the opera.
No, but just in terms of a work of art, I mean, there was a time when Livy was popular reading, maybe 100 years ago in the United States, in which a lot of these stories from Livy, there were popularizations of them, which were very widely read.
And Britain was a Brit, so they know classics.
Yeah. But somehow Livy has fallen out of favor. People still make movies based on Homer and based on other things from Greek history and from Roman history, Spartacus and Gladiator, as you say, but these earlier Republican heroes, they were very big to the founding fathers of the United States and things like that, but they've very much fallen out of vogue.
Yeah, my worry is that you put on the opera and it's an Italian language, right? And then how people are going to be.
My own suggestion would be you probably would that's probably a distraction.
Yeah, I know, because it's even when I'm at the opera, I mean, I love it, but other people, even with subtitles, that they can't get into it. Especially it's they don't understand the language. I mean, I go particularly see like Netrebko and like all this famous tenors, but I don't go to see a particular opera. I go to see a singer, or the performer. To me, that's the most important thing. So I just want to, again, Paul, it's an incredible job. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about the Bronze Age in Asia. So join us. New presenter Alex C. She stepped up. She wanted to do something on that. And then next week, join us for meditation by Marcus Aurelius. We're going to be particularly talking about, and I'm going to dig it up. I have several suggestions for the book, but there is different writings that were presented. That 1 second, I'll read it out to you. Oi, sorry. God, I'll post it on the meetup, but I forget the name of the writer, but I can post it on meetup, and if you can guys read it before. I literally want to have a discussion. I'm not an expert by any means of Stoicism, but we're going to talk about history of Stoicism, and then we probably have a discussion on meditation by Marcus Aurelius. It's a 5-hour audio book. So, but I'm sure there's a summarization, and there's plenty of summarization. I'll post it on there on the on a meetup. There's a summarization of his meditation, so you don't have to read the whole 5 hours of audio and stuff. What did you say, Marcel, Greg?
Oh, I want to say that if you want to look up someone, there is a Shakespeare play, Coriolanus, and there is a movie made by Ralph Fiennes. I haven't seen it on that Shakespeare play, but it's Coriolanus. That's the early Republic figure, hero, kind of. If you want to do just an idea, okay.
Yeah. This time I just want, because it's such a,
in the future,
vivid moment of the sexuality in Rome that I wanted to start with that, kind of like that's what kicked it off.
I mean, you got to understand that the Romans were relative prudes. The Greeks reveled in running around naked. For them, that was a positive good. That being naked represented heroism and so forth. And the Romans were a much more conservative culture, much less given to public display, much more given to belief in modesty as a social good.
Until the decadence of the empire period, empirical period,
So
like Tiberius, Caligula, right?
But and it was the Greeks that changed Roman society.
Right, and from there on, there were plenty even later on in the third century.
But when you talk about the old Roman Republic,
right, Republic,
that's
they were
the
very
image
conservative,
stern guys, who didn't make a show and.
Yeah, but I will talk about public bathrooms. Obviously, as most of the deals are made in that. I mean, it's still part of the, you can't tell me that there was no attraction, the male-to-male attraction going on there as well. There must have been.
I personally
just discussing political affairs.
You think that a public bathroom in any era is an attractive place for a sexual liaison? I don't think so.
It was for a political liaison was used more. Just sitting next and discussing, what are you going to vote for in Senate?
Yeah, but you know what?
It was such a stench. I don't think it's any activity.
Listen, I'm talking about
the whole city was smelling
bathing.
like that.
No, I'm talking about the bathing and we were talking about when they were bathing together, right?
Bathing, right, of course.
Yes, that was what I'm talking about, right? Bathroom, I'm talking about in stretched term.
Yeah.
And then when they found, especially in Paris, when they found the Roman ruins of the bathhouses, there was all this sexual insignias on the walls, right? Mm-hmm. And they were depicting all these positions and sexual, activity, which is what I was talking about. Sorry. So I don't know.
Yeah, in Pompeii, it's a very famous. There is this room where they say it's closed, but when I was there, like over 40 years ago, it was still open. So it had all of the positions all around it near the ceiling, So they had it, but again, this is already imperial period.
It's fine. I'm not talking early republics. You know, we're just gonna talk the whole Rome. Even we'll touch on, you know, Eastern Empire. I mean, it doesn't need to be, you know, again, that's going to be a stretched notion. I haven't created it yet. So, and I wanted to play maybe a piece of the movie for Tarquinius, if I can find something, you know, if you guys have any suggestions, let me know.
I'm sure there must be. I mean,
yeah. And also on Stoicism, any suggestions? Like I said, I'm not an expert. I want to have a discussion more than anything. You know, but it's an interesting fact. Every day we read Marcus Aurelius, that people believe in Stoicism and in that.
Well, Seneca was before, like more than 100 years before, was probably one of the most prominent Stoics.
Yeah,
right?
But one of the most important facts, right? I mean, it was created obviously in Greece. Is this fisherman, right, who lost everything, and he was very cynical. And then he's like, "What the hell am I cynical about? I still have my two hands, my two legs, whatever it is. I can live." You know, and that is how the Stoicism kind of created its way. You know,
Stoicism or cynicism?
Well, initially he wanted to say like, listen, I can't, you know, I can't survive. But I was like, you know what? I still have my hands, I still have my legs. I have to create something that will make me survive this disaster I just, you know, faced. And living, as Paul was saying, living on like scraps to survive, so to speak. Not
like
cynicism.
Diogenes. How do you pronounce it? Yeah, that was probably like you could say a cynic. You know, that's the you know, they call cynic because of they lived like dogs, right?
Right. Well, we can touch on that as well. I mean, you know, yeah, they live like dogs. They're homeless people. Right?
I think Stoicism was considered to be father of Stoicism as Zeno of Cyprus. I think it's like a 3rd century BC.
And
or second.
The famous Roman Stoics would include Cato.
Yeah.
Who was a leading figure in the resistance to Julius Caesar.
Right.
And he was
the junior, right? The junior.
Yes, right. The younger Marcus Porcius Cato.
Right.
Was a very well-known cynic. I'm sorry, very well-known Stoic.
Mm-hmm.
And the basic idea was that, you know, all these things. The question was, what is the path to happiness? What represents true happiness for a human being? And the Stoics found happiness in duty.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's oh, by the way, I just wanted to mention, we're going to have New Year bash, so do let me know if you're interested. I haven't reserved the spot yet on the 12/18. It will be probably our last presentation in this year, and I just want to meet everybody, say thank you, kind of stuff, and, you know, and share a drink. Let me know if you guys are interested. I'm planning to have about 30 people or so. We'll see. It's Restaurant Sveta, and I will follow it with Whitney Art Museum. Or we can do it before for an hour and we'll go there at 1 o'clock. You know, we'll decide what. It's still a little bit away, but I just want to make reservations.
And it's in the West Village, right?
Sveta is in the West Village. We actually migrated from Queens to the city, and the food is amazing. It's Ashkenazi Russian food based, not Sephardic.
And next Sunday we're going, right? Next Sunday we're going to
next Sunday,
to Marivanna, right? It's East Village.
And whoever wants to join me for the Ukrainian Museum at 12, and then from there, I think the tickets are like $10. So do buy tickets in advance, and then we'll go to Marivanna. And we have spots reserved, 18 people, 9 and 9. We'll split it because, meaning it split the group because they. Otherwise, we'll have to do prefix menu, and I want people forced to be people to get prefix menu. I think they require like $75, and this way we can just order whatever you guys want off the menu. You know, a la carte. It's better to do a la carte and stuff.
Sure.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Just want to thank you, Paul, again. Join us tomorrow or Wednesday or next week Sunday for Macedonian and Punic worth numero tres. And then whenever you guys see you in person or not, do join our Zoom meetings. Thank you so much, Paul, again.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
All
Yeah.
right.
Happy Thanksgiving and thanks again, Paul.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, great presentation. Very nice.
Happy Thanksgiving.
All
Yep,
right.
thanks a
Take
lot,
care.
Paul. Very good.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good job, Paul.